I'm so excited to have you be a part of the Insert Credit Universe, Gio. It's going to be so good.
Yeah.
I'm so excited. Yeah, I thank you for asking me to do it. What a game to start with. That's lovely.
I'll have you know that this is a first for our show. We have never taken an episode to review a video game before.
Ooh.
It's just not what we do.
Yeah.
Final Fantasy is just too big of a thing. It's sort of like, I used to compare it to Saturday Night Live in that it's just eternal. No matter how good or bad it is, it's always around.
And people have strong opinions on it and want me to die as well.
You should not be out of doors. We have discussed this. This is episode 295 of Insert Credit. This week, we're breaking our traditional format of selected topics where I try my best to get the panel to talk about old games I don't know about, punctured by a horrible buzzer, for a long-form discussion of a brand new video game you actually may have heard about. This is our final Fantastacular 16. I'm Alex Jaffe, and my first Final Fantasy was Tactics Advance.
I'm Gita Jackson, and my first Final Fantasy was Final Fantasy X, watching it over my older brother's shoulder.
Oh, similar with me, but for my dorm mate in college at the time.
Oh, cute.
I'm Ash Parrish, and my first Final Fantasy was Final Fantasy VIII that I found on a demo disc for my brother's PlayStation 1.
Cool.
And hi, I'm Giovanni Colantonio, and my first Final Fantasy was looking at the box art for Final Fantasy Tactics in a BJ's when I was a kid and being like, man, I really want this game. I don't know anything about it, and then not getting it. So I guess it wasn't my first, but I did see it. That was the first one I saw and remember.
It gave you the bug.
Yeah, I was like, ooh, that's a cool name. I want that.
Yeah, Giovanni Colantonio, he's done gaming, reporting for Digital Trends, Inverse, Polygon, bunch of other places. You've got a podcast yourself, right?
Yes, I do a show called Left Trigger, Right Trigger. We call it a video game book club, and it's very inaccurate, but that's what we call it.
Cool. That's the opposite of our mission statement here, but we're doing it this week anyway.
Perfect.
The one thing I refuse to ask my panelists usually is, what have you been playing lately? And everything we do is in opposition to that. But this week we're actually going to do it. We're actually going to talk about Final Fantasy XVI with a bunch of people who have written extensively about Final Fantasy XVI. Here is how this is going to work. First, we're going to talk about Final Fantasy XVI as a game. We're going to leave story out of it. Let's talk about Final Fantasy as a Final Fantasy. What does it mean? Is this a Final Fantasy game? What is a Final Fantasy game?
So I think one of the more difficult things to answer is whether or not this is a Final Fantasy game, because so many Final Fantasy games have been mechanically wildly different.
Mm-hmm.
And this one also makes a huge leap in a new direction. But I think mechanically, something that makes it feel unlike in a negative way from all the other Final Fantasies is that it does not do a good job of paying homage to Final Fantasy's roots as a turn-based role-playing game. It, in every respect, is extremely linear and extremely streamlined. I remember looking at, I really, really, really love the fast-paced Devil May Cry style combat in this game.
Oh yeah.
I think it's so thrilling. It's so much fun. But I do remember getting ability points and then looking at what I could spend them on and being like, that's it? These are my only options?
I agree.
Yeah, just going to say, in terms of, is it Final Fantasy? I thought about that a lot when talking about this, and I think ultimately I was kind of like, I think the only thing that makes a Final Fantasy game at this point in 2023 is the fact that it's different than the other games, and it's sure different. I remember interviewing the team behind this like a couple months ago, and I asked them, to you, what's a Final Fantasy game? And they were like, oh, it has magic and Moogles and Chocobos. And I was like, okay, I guess that's all it means. So I guess so. But to me, Final Fantasy at this point is just like a brand name. Like it really does just kind of feel like a brand name. And I think that's fine. But I think I wrote this in my review where it was like, if this game had just been on a Sony State of Play revealed with the title like Iconic Chronicles or Iconic Legacy,
right,
would people react to it in the same way that they're reacting to it now. I don't know. People ask that question all the time with like Pokemon. Like, if this wasn't Pokemon, would people like it? And it's like, well, yeah, because the design philosophy is the same. But with this, it's like, I genuinely don't know. It really is just kind of its own video game.
The answer to that question is no. Emphatically no.
Yeah.
Nobody would, because I, like the rest of you, really enjoyed the game, and it's like Devil May Cry vibes, but all the RPG aspects kind of left me feeling cold. And if this game had any other name, we would not be talking about it like this.
Forspoken, for instance. Let's just bring that in here.
All right, start to Forspoken time was very short.
I didn't get a chance to play Forspoken. I have a code Square sent me somewhere in my email that I should redeem. Oops. But I remember how resistant people were to a Square Enix game that was high fantasy, that had this fast-paced combat, but wasn't a Final Fantasy game, and how skeptical they were of all of its imperfections, which it wasn't a perfect game. I wonder if this was, iconic legacy, let's say, instead of Final Fantasy. I do feel like people would be more open to talking about the things they don't like about the game, but I feel like Final Fantasy as a genre, as an institution, just means so much to people at this point that no one can ever be normal about it ever again.
Right.
Yeah.
The anecdote I remember is there was a Sony State of Play, I think like a year or two ago, I think it was last year, where they started showing this like strategy game. And I was, following the talk about the game on social, like the stream on social when it happened. And immediately people were like, Final Fantasy Tactics, yeah! And people were like going nuts for like 2 minutes while this trailer played. And then it was like, this game's the Dio Field Chronicles. And everyone was like, oh, we don't care anymore.
I knew that's what you're going for.
Yeah, and it's like, oh, suddenly we don't care. We were all really excited for 2 minutes about this game until it didn't have the brand name on it. And so, yeah, I kind of get that vibe with this, where like, I wish we could have A/B tested this, in a world where they put it out with a different name, because I really think the conversation would be so different right now.
Yeah. I hear a lot of comparisons to Devil May Cry in the conversation about this game. But, like, we've talked about it as a Final Fantasy game, but as a Devil May Cry game, does it work? Would people who love Devil May Cry love this? Would people who hate Devil May Cry hate this? What's the difference?
I think the people who love Devil May Cry probably won't jive with this because it takes itself way too seriously.
Yeah.
And I think one of the selling points of Devil May Cry, in addition to its action, is its kind of irreverence and its like happy-go-lucky funness that this game just does not have. So I don't think that this will translate well for Devil May Cry fans who are looking to get into the series, unfortunately. But you know what does? Stranger of Paradise.
Yeah.
Definitely does not take itself seriously. It's not the same kind of action, but it like kind of feels like that. So Devil May Cry fans, if you want a Final Fantasy game, go over there because they got good shit going on.
I think there's one area in specific of this game that Devil May Cry fans would like, and it's the hunts. The hunts are the coolest thing in this game, mechanically, I think. And it's the only one where I feel like the game actually wants me to use my brain. Every other mechanic in this game, it is so linear that I don't feel like much thinking is involved for me. But the hunts, eventually you unlock a hunt board, and they have posters up on it, and they have short descriptions and a general location for where that thing will be, but otherwise, it's not marked on a map. You just have to go find it. And when you do, these are just optional boss battles, essentially. And they are pretty hard. And they are very rewarding. And it is just about the pure chaos of using all your iconic powers. And that's when the game, for me, is at its most exhilarating. That and the boss fights, again, once you've gone through all this narrative stuff that we'll talk about later, but that just didn't really interest me that much and is extremely self-serious. You get to these boss fights, and then they are actually just elements of spectacle that are ridiculous to behold. Like, during the Bahamut Bash fight, which I know you and me, Ash, have been tweeting about this back and forth a little bit.
Vaguely.
Oh my god.
We don't want to spoil too much.
My mouth just like dropped open while I was doing the fight. I was like,
yes.
What is happening here? It was incredible. I think about it every day when I think about what is it that I like about Final Fantasy 16. And it's like, well, I've never seen that in a game before. I have never seen a boss fight that spectacular, that over the top, that willing to keep pushing and pushing to a new height of spectacle. And to one that actually pulls off the power fantasy on top of it.
I was going to say, I think the best way to describe it without giving too much away is that it is a shonen fight.
Absolutely.
A lot of the boss battles in Final Fantasy XVI evoke that same kind of knockdown, drag out, epic Sasuke versus Naruto at the falls, shonen anime fight that just gets you like out of your seat, like blood pressure through the roof, heart rate through the roof, like, you know, pupils fully dilated, like you are locked in. I am so invested. And that's what these fights feel like. And it is an amazing feeling. Like, I wish you could like distill that Bahamut fight. I wish you could just like distill that into some kind of medicine that you could just take if you wanted a serotonin boost, like at any time of the day. It would be just like the purest high that you could ever experience in life. And that honestly is doing a lot of heavy lifting for what is otherwise a largely mediocre to not great game.
Yeah. The thing that I was going to say is, like, first of all, I agree. The icon battles are like incredible, and that's the point in this game where I'm like, this is the future for this series. Like, if they're really serious about doing an action series, give me these really over the top things that make, you know, the 2D games and what you felt the scale of them was like when you played them way back in the day, like, you know, bring those to their logical conclusion, this like giant blockbuster. And I think we all probably agree on like the action part of this, where this game is just, the play of it and the combat of it is so fantastic, and there's so much you can do with it. And, you know, the combo videos I think that people are going to make with this game are going to be wild.
Yeah.
In terms of talking about whether or not people who love Devil May Cry will like it, the one sticking point I have, and I think it's where, despite the fact that I like love the combat and love all the action in this game, the part where I really start to diverge from a lot of opinion on it is, I think that there's a reason that something like Devil May Cry 5 is like an 8-hour video game.
Yeah.
Like you really, there is a pace for an action game. It's, you know, it's like pacing a movie at 90 minutes, right? Where it's like, yeah, this is the length that this thing is. Like, and 8 hours is such a sweet spot to show you everything, to not overdo it, to let you play with everything and get the most out of it, but, you know, not bore you. And I think trying to just take that system and put it into like a 50, I mean, it took me like 50 hours to get through this game. You can spend 70 out on it, I think, if you kind of 100% it. I think that's where it starts to break down. It's like, if there was an editor's cut of this game that was 10 hours, it was all the icon battles, it was all the lead up to it, man, this game, I'd be totally in agreement with everybody, you know, like this game is as good as people are saying, but it's that like 40 hours in between that kind of, I don't know, stops me from loving it.
You know, I'm with you on that. I do think there's pacing problems in this game. I also similarly took about 50 hours, and I at a certain point just stopped doing the side quests because I was like, this is just continuing my experience. And I think actually there is good character writing all over this game, but the side quests have some of the worst writing in the game. Period.
Oh no.
They're just, so Ash has played 14.
Yes.
Which shares a director with 16. And Ash, you're very familiar with the repetitive, and you can set your watch by it questing design of that game, which is you go somewhere, you talk to a guy, they tell you to talk to 3 guys. You talk to those 3 guys, you talk to the same guy again, and then you go somewhere and you kill 3 monsters, and then you talk to that guy again. And then you go somewhere else and you collect 3 things, and then you talk to that guy again. And then the quest is over. And that's how every single quest in this game is. When you had to collect sand for mid, I wanted to scream.
Jesus Christ, yep.
There's a sand collecting quest in this game.
That's part of the main quest line too. That's not even a side quest.
Here at Insert Credit, we're very big fans of Final Fantasy 15. That's like our modern Final Fantasy because of the hang-out-itude of the game, which is a thing we talk about a lot with RPGs. What you want to do in an RPG is you want to kind of crawl in and live in the world and hang out in it. And have an excuse to just like explore it for a while. But it feels like 16 isn't that kind of game. Am I wrong?
Not at all.
No, not at all.
It is not. It's really sad.
They just don't give you time to hang out with the characters. And I kind of like the characters. I wanted to hang out with them too. I wanted to hang out more with Sid for sure. And I also, Sid is amazing. I love him.
He's the best Sid in any Final Fantasy incarnation. Like the only one that comes maybe close second is Final Fantasy VII Sid. Like he is the best Sid.
I don't know. I'm a real big fan of Final Fantasy IV Sid.
Yeah, I don't know.
That little dwarf dude.
But, I mean, if that guy's not telling you to sit down and drink your fucking tea, then it doesn't count. But yeah, there's And the thing is that they give you these characters that you fall in love with and then immediately shunt them off somewhere else, and you never get to hang out with them.
That's horrible.
And they give you really nice moments with them, like within a cutscene, but then, they fuck off and they're never seen again. I'm thinking of Dion in specifically
oh my God, Dion.
Yeah, when you get him for the first time, like, he's like, oh, okay, cool. They're not doing that thing where, you know what? I'm not going to even say that because I don't know what the spoiler
Not
is.
yet.
Not yet. We're going to come up to a spoiler break soon.
Yeah, that is the most damning thing you could have said about the game to me, because without that, is it even a Final Fantasy anymore?
What I really was hoping for would be there would be a moment where the game opens up. There's 2 specific moments where the game is like, do these side quests and then get back to the main plot.
Mm-hmm.
And I was hoping at one of those moments I would get a chance to choose my party and then just walk around with them and get the same kind of banter that you'd get in like Dragon's Age Inquisition, which was one of my favorite things in that game was just changing my party up just to see how people would talk to each other. And
absolutely.
It just doesn't materialize. It's like these characters really do feel like they exist behind glass. And the game does not want me to be around them unless they have a specific narrative purpose. And it really, it's a shame because I also was hoping for those moments for the game to open up because I wanted to hang out with these characters and use my powers more to practice with them. But they really encourage you rather to sort of practice in an open world. Or in the open areas of the map, I should say. It's definitely not an open world.
Yeah.
They encourage you to practice in practice rooms rather than to practice against mobs. Mobs don't scale the level with you, so you end up just fighting these mobs that are like level 11 while you're level 35.
Yeah. A lot of what we're talking about kind of comes back to the core problem I think I have with the game and why I ended up being not as huge on it. I like it for the record. I think it's good. The action part of it is very fun and satisfying in like a Hollywood blockbuster way where I'm like, well, turn the brain off for the other 40 hours. But the problem for me is that like I just think it's really bad at delivering payoff.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, like in story payoff, in things like that, where you're expecting, oh, they're gonna give me a moment with these characters, and it never happens. And even going back to the side quests, the side quests themselves are rough, but it would be tolerable if there was a payoff for doing them. But the rewards for the side quests are so meaningless and useless that it's like, well, these weren't worth doing either. And that's what it is for me. I feel like I invested so much, especially because the introduction to it is so strong. The first 3 hours is that like tight, almost like movie like opening, and then you have it like it kind of follows up on that. And it just never pays anything off. And I think we'll get to that more in the story where things kind of fall apart. But I think it's present in the gameplay too, where I kept waiting for things to happen that never happen.
Like, so many of the rewards for quests are either gil or items that you can sell for gil, but you almost never have to buy anything. I don't know if this was either your experience, Ash or Gio, but I would like go to the store just to, see what was in there. And then all you do is buy the highest rated weapon and then go to the blacksmith and have them upgrade it to +2. And then there's nothing for you to buy. I had like 100,000 gil by the end of the game.
Oh, I hate that.
Don't have to buy anything.
I think that's why they make the Orchestrion songs as expensive as they are, because they realized a little bit too late, like, oh shit, there's really nothing you can do with all this money that you've accumulated. So we have to give something that incentivizes using it so it doesn't feel wasted, which is why, like, if you want to buy, like, the Orchestrion, if you don't know, is like a feature from Final Fantasy XIV that allows you to play like music from the game in like the little hub area. And you can buy them at certain shops all over the world, and they're like ridiculously expensive. They're like 40,000, 50,000, whatever. And you have no other use for your money other than that. Like, if you want the highest level weapons, you have to do some quests and you have to kill some hunts, and then they'll give you the materials that you need to do that. And like after a certain point in the game, like you just don't buy weapons anymore. You don't need to, because your most powerful weapons are going to be the ones that you make. And so, like, yeah, it's like a waste.
Yeah, and again, it's like everything you're doing is rewarding you gil or crafting materials. And like, yeah, I had such a glut because you can't spend them on items because you're capped at like, 6 potions or whatever for like most of the game. Like you cannot hoard items if you want. And then it's like, oh, okay, I'll go explore this world, which there's no reason to explore because it's like you found 2 gil, and it's like I have 100,000. I don't need this. It's really really weird the way that they like underplay the RPG systems to the point you know, and I don't mind that. I don't mind taking the RPG out of the game if you want to make a pure action game. But for me, it's like, then just don't put that stuff in there at all, because what's left is like the bones of a system without any of the reward or reason that you do that stuff in a game. And that just like kills a lot of the game for me, where I'm like, I just don't want to go do anything, because anytime I go off and like wander on the beaten path or do a side quest, I'm like, that was such a waste of time. Why did I do that?
I found exactly one thing that was cool while wandering, and the game made no indication that this existed elsewhere.
What was it?
After I beat one of the hunts, one of the Garuda has those two other girlies, and then one of them is just So I beat her, and then I wandered around in that corner because I don't know, just wanted to see if there was anything over there, and I found another arret stone. So arret stones are the thing in the hub world that allow you to access replaying levels and the practice mode. I found an arret stone that had a challenge mode where they would give you specific powers, and you'd have to defeat a horde of enemies under a time limit, and doing specific things gave you more time in the next section. And I only found that once. And I was like, am I really going to have to scour every inch of this worthless map to find another one of these?
Oh, no.
I only found, I know what you're talking about. I only found one too. I don't know if we found the same one, because mine had the challenge of the Phoenix in it. So I don't know if we found the same one. But yeah, that was like another disappointing aspect about the RPG elements of the game. There's like no reward for exploration. Like, I'm very Diablo brained in that I want to uncover, or Tears of the Kingdom brain too, either. I just want to uncover the entire map and see what is in all the hidden nooks and crannies. And there was one area where I was like, oh, this is a little offshoot of a place that I've already been before, but it was locked off previously. Let me see what's behind there. And usually what's there is a hunt that I did not like set up on my board or whatever, or nothing.
Yeah.
And the other thing about that is that there's no reward for exploration. Like, usually in Final Fantasy games, like if you go to a place, you can run into somebody who will give you a side quest, and you can go on this neat little bespoke tiny adventure with you and your friends and, discover something, kill a boss, get some things, improve this little corner of the world. But they've removed even that like exploration-ness of it by having these little pips on the map that tells you there's a side quest here and there's a side quest here, which is fine because, but they also make it so that you don't even have to leave your hub to get access to these side quests, because there's a thing where Clive can go in his like little room and he'll get letters from people, and the letters will tell him like, this side quest is here, go do this side quest is here, go do this, etc., etc. And it's like, what's even the point?
Yeah. Oh, there's the that guy also that has the allied reports, where if you just talk to him, he's like, oh, there's some guys who want you to do something over here, and then it's all on your map too, and it's just like, I hate this. But sorry, go ahead, Jaffe.
To me, this sounds a lot like the problem a lot of people had with Final Fantasy XIII, where the entire game kind of had this hallway design that discouraged any kind of exploration. And this game seems to have a larger map, but no reason to actually explore it.
Counterpoint, that did happen in 13, but there was eventually a point where they let you off the rails and let you go. 16 never lets you go.
Yeah. Basically, any optional nook and cranny in this world only exists for something to happen in once you trigger a subquest or a hunt or something. And then there will be nothing in it before that, and there will be nothing in it after that. So I kept walking around and being like, cool, like let's find some stuff. And you soon learn the language of the game is like, this is an open area, but it's not. I mean, like you are truly wasting your time if you do that. Just find the quest and you'll get to every corner of this map at some point, which maybe people will like that. That's fine. But like, why have the illusion of an open area if it's not? At least like put some environmental storytelling, do the Bethesda thing and put a skeleton on a toilet somewhere so I can be like, oh, what happened here? But like, there's not even that. It's pretty wild.
Yeah.
Speaking of storytelling, is there anything we want to say more about the game before we go on to break open the seal?
Design-wise, I find a lot of the combat really, really clean. It makes a lot of sense, and it is laid out to you in a way that makes it perfectly understandable, even though it is so complex. But the one thing I hate so much about this game is the upgrade system. It is truly there just to be there. Ability point, you could remove ability points and just have everything fully upgraded, and it would not make a single ounce of difference. It feels like another way that the game is trying to get you to do stuff, but not give you a satisfying reward for it. I mean, for instance, the final upgrade on every single iconic ability you have it doesn't make it more powerful. It just allows you to bind it to any icon. Like, why doesn't that come default? I'm so sorry. That's really dumb.
Yeah, I it's very frustrating. It feels like this game has a linear progression system like an action game, and they kind of try and like hide it from you. And they're like, "Ooh, you have choices." And it's like, "No, I don't. There's only one most powerful weapon at any given
Yeah.
time. There's only one most powerful piece of gear, you know. It's just there's no actual progression." And again, I wouldn't mind. I really wouldn't if this was just actually an action game, but so much of the stuff here feels like it's out of obligation to be like
To the
people are
name.
gonna people are gonna expect this from a Final Fantasy game, and it's like maybe just like maybe let's just stop using the name then. Like I don't know, maybe we could just end the series at that point.
I was gonna finish up by saying like the thing with the side quests where everything is laid out before you, and then because everything is so like consequenceless and nothing, like the side quests, some of them are okay, I guess, and some of them are really, really tedious. And it kind of, and then you eventually, because you experience this so much, you get to a point where it's like, well, there's no point, right? There's no point in doing any of these side quests unless they're the little plus ones that give Clive some kind of like upgrade, like makes his potions more powerful or gives him more potion inventory or whatever. But that works against it because then there are quests that you will want to do that have some story significance in a minor way that you'll never see because you have been conditioned up until that point to just like ignore them because they are so bland. Like I'm thinking of there's a quest that involves Torgal, your dog, and there was a really, really sweet, touching moment about it that otherwise I would have missed because I do everything regarding the dog because spoiler alert, not to bring the mood down, but during playing and for the game for the review, I had to put my own dog to sleep. So I'm like really sensitive about dog stuff. And so anytime I see anything about Torgal popped up, I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this. And what ended up happening was it was this really nice quest where you and Torgal go alone to this like little island and you learn a little bit more about what Torgal was doing in like the time jump between when you first meet him and when we meet up with Clive again. And it was so sweet and it was so nice. And it was such a nice little bit of character development that I wish was in more of the side quests for this game that I would have completely missed because the absolute chaff the rest of the side quests were.
You're so right about the game conditioning you not to play side quests. I also would have missed that Torgal side quest, and I did it just because Torgal's like low-key my favorite character. Torgal is very well characterized, and I love him.
All right, let's talk a lot more about that. I'm breaking open the seal. All of these sections of this show are time-stamped, so if you are spoiler averse, you'll know by consulting the show notes when this discussion begins and ends. Let's talk about the story.
I'll start on the general note because I think a lot of the details of this story go in and out one ear for reasons that I think we'll get into. The thing that I will say is that what's disappointing about the story for me is it goes back to the payoff issue that I was talking about. Those first 3 hours of the game set up a really strong story, right? It sets up this clear revenge story. You understand Clive's motivations. You understand his character arc as it gets into like the second act of the game, where it's like he's kind of trying to push ahead and be his own person, but he's held back by the past and he kind of has to deal with this. And there was just a lot of like really relatable stuff in there that I could really chew into. And I think that's what a lot of people were responding to in the demo, being like, I'm so gripped, I'm so in on this. And there is a point where the game is just like, okay, anyways, yeah, so that happened. Now on to the kingdom battle. And you're like, what? And then it's like, just kidding. Here's the real big bad. He's the White Walker from Game of Thrones. And you're like, what happened? Like, what's going on? And like, it never pays off a story thread because it just like finishes one and then is like, here's the next thing. And you're like, okay, cool. I guess I'll get invested in this. And it's like, don't get too invested. Slavery's not a big deal. And you're like, what's happening?
There really is a moment in the game where you can feel it stop being interested in it's not that complex, but the relatively complex political situation that they've spent that and up until that moment a lot of time setting up for you. And then suddenly you meet the ultimate villain who is Ultima, and all of that goes out the window. And it's just becomes a story about killing God. And I usually like it in RPGs when you kill God, but I had a lot of other questions about all of the things that I spent all that time doing and they never get resolved.
Gita, I'm going to take a guess as to the moment where you stop caring about the story. It's when they kill the Cersei analog, isn't it?
Oh my god. I have a lot of things to say about the racial approach in this in this game, which Dash and I have chatted about a little bit. But I also just want to give a shout out to the like it's writing of women that is so retrograde. I was kind of shocked.
Oh my god!
So there's two women that look identical. They're both sexy blondes, and the only reason they get ever for their motivations is because they're evil because they're evil, essentially. Like, the Cersei analog is Clive's mother, and Clive outright asks her, like, why did you treat me like shit, but you love my younger brother? And she was like, oh, because I'm evil. I'm evil because I'm evil. And then also those two women go insane before they die.
And then nothing happens.
And then the only woman that gets to hold power in this game, Jill, and not lose her mind, she's the only one. And the reason why she gets to not lose her mind by the end is because she gives her power away.
Her powers. Yeah.
Like, it was, I couldn't believe it.
It was truly like they took the complaint from Final Fantasy 15 where people were like, hey, there were like no female characters. And they were like, well, you're going to hate when we actually put them in the game. And it's like, okay. Maybe this is why you didn't write them in the first place, but maybe you should hire other people to write then.
Yeah. And to give them more than what we were given. Because I think that the women characters in the game were actually kind of well done. I hate the way that the game treats them because if we got more time with them, I think they would have made for really strong characters, especially Benedicta.
Yes.
Especially Jill, because Jill is so flat in one note, and it's really sad because there are a lot of interesting things about her that kind of get addressed but don't, especially like with her time in the Iron Islands.
Okay, number one problems with Jill. I mean, let's go character by character and talk about like what makes them flat and the potential that they had. With Jill, there is that one chapter of development she has where she's like, by the way, Clive, before we do anything else, I have to kill my abuser. And Clive is like, oh, okay. then you just do. And Clive was like, are you, is that gonna backfire on us in any way? And she's like, no, killing my abuser is good. And I was like, good for you. But there is like this, after that period of time, she just stops developing there, and you stop hearing about what her life is like. She's also begins the game literally as a political prisoner, and she seems to have no opinions on that whatsoever. So as a child, she was taken from her family to ensure peace between two warring territories, and she just doesn't ever talk about that. And I feel like that character would have something to say, but I don't know. I know that's like how they do it in Game of Thrones, where Theon Greyjoy never has anything to say about, you know, being a Greyjoy but living among the Starks. But also Theon Greyjoy has a lot of shit going on, you know, and Jill just doesn't.
And we got to explore a little bit of that when he does his little heel turn against the Starks later in the series.
Yeah. Jill just doesn't get that, and it feels missing. Especially after she loses her powers and she stops doing anything in the game. It feels like she just stopped. They had one thing they wanted to do with her, and then it just stopped. And Ash, I also totally agree with you about Benedicta, who they set up as like a sexy lady doing it for themselves, you know? And she ends up getting slut-shamed by a Cid.
Nothing about her.
And we know nothing about her. And then she goes crazy and then she dies.
Benedicta especially, because we know that she had a relationship with Cid. We know something happened, and that caused her to jump ship over to Barnabas. We don't know why.
We don't know why.
That is never explored. That's never answered. We don't know what it was. And then at the end of her life, we get this like last little glimpsing moment where she's like, oh, I'm alone and I wish somebody would love me. And then Cid comes up and, you know, saves her. Like, how does she fumble the best man in the twins? Like, what happened there?
The only man that knows that slavery is wrong. Fumble the bag.
I part of it, I wonder if part of it has to do with like the structure of this game. We were talking about the kind of lack of a party system and how you're never like really walking around with people. And I wonder if that's just like where that stuff should have happened, right? Where you got these loose conversations with Jill that made her feel like a character, because what ends up happening is that she's plopped into the story whenever she's relevant, and like whatever arc she has just becomes its own like bottle episode within Final Fantasy 16 of like, hey, let's check in on Jill. And she's like, cool, here's how I'm feeling. Clive's like, cool, thanks. I have to go kill God now. And she's like, great, I'll see you later. Like, it just feels like there's this revolving door for the cast members in the game where it's just like, here's this person's turn to have like one scene and then they're gone. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe this would have worked as a TV show. Maybe they were trying to structure it too much like a TV show, but like, it just doesn't. I don't know.
I would remark to my partner that it felt like I was being dropped into the 4th season of a television show and I didn't know what was going on. That's what it feels like. It feels like they were going for understated, but what they did was just not explain anything.
Not state.
Yeah. So
not understated.
Unstated.
Lack of state. Yeah.
Yes. I remember, and then the stuff that does get explained gets explained in the fucking in-game wiki, and that made me bonkers.
The active lore system. I want to talk about this.
Which is a great system.
It's a very cool system, and I did read every single entry, and I thought the ones that added depth rather than explaining character motivations were well written and interesting, right? I loved hearing about Moss the Chronicler, which is such a Game of Thrones ass thing to have, of course. Moss the Chronicler. But I really liked learning about like deep lore of Valisthea, and like I liked knowing that and feeling like this world had existed long beyond this conflict. But what I didn't like was so the Sampaqua Emperor menaces. I mentioned this in the review. He menaces. He's always holding this flower. And I think some people who read my review didn't understand what I meant by this, but I was already 400 words over my word count when I submitted my draft. So he has this flower. When I first saw that, I was like, I wonder what's up with that flower. Hopefully he'll speak aloud and talk about that flower. No. But every scene that he's in, he's always got this flower. And he's giving it to people. The camera pans over this flower. And it's like very significant, clearly. But you don't know anything about the flower. And it's also not a flower that exists in the real world. So I can't draw any information about it from outside sources. The only place that you learn that flower is like the national flower of the Sambrek Empire is in the wiki. And it kills me that not a character could have said that. A character could have just said that out loud so that everybody watching the scene could know why it was so important and significant to the scene. And there are many tiny little pieces where it's like they want to make it more subtle by just taking out necessary information for the players to know and putting them elsewhere.
They really tried to do like the North remembers, but one of the key things that Game of Thrones does is that they repeat those words. The North remembers, and gives us context. Like, this is the words of House Stark. When you say this shit, you are invoking House Stark.
Yeah.
So in season whatever, when Arya rips off her mask and stabs Walder Frey in the heart and goes, the North fucking remembers, we're like, yes, 100%.
Pay off.
And that's what they were going for, but they did not do enough foundation setting for you to get that, like, explicitly. Not in the text explicitly, but like explicitly explaining that to the viewer. And it was that payoff just wasn't there, even though they tried to like, this is the payoff, it's not there.
Yeah.
It reminds me of like the way they dole the story out through the active time lore and whatnot. Reminds me kind of like Destiny 1 when they were doing like the grimoire in that game, where they were like, hey, there's a lot of story in this game. Open your telephone app to look at the backstory behind this gun that's really cool, and you're like, I'm not gonna do that.
Yeah.
that's kind of how the entire game feels. We're like, yeah, there's like cool stuff, but like, man, this game's already pretty long, and like characters are talking a lot of lore at me, and you want me to sit and read more lore? Like, come on, you could have used one of these conversations to tell me the cool thing that's relevant to the plot, right?
Ash, you're a big BioWare fan. How much of the in-game codex do you read?
I read all of it.
So how does a game encourage you to do that, to engage with its lore in that way?
Yeah, interesting question, because I think we're talking about two different things and how BioWare implements its lore for Dragon Age and how Square Enix has done this active time lore for Final Fantasy XVI. Like, if active time lore was just a thing to remind you the who, what, wheres, and the whens and flesh out like deeper things about the world more than just info dumps, because the fantastic, beautiful thing about BioWare codexes is that they give you things like art, they give you poems, they give you songs, they give you, that world's equivalent of Bible verses. Yeah. And it all adds like this extra rich addition to the game. So you feel like Thetis. Don't laugh about Thetis. I know we bring this up every time that Thetis stands for the Dragon Age, whatever.
So
setting.
It just adds more flavor to that world, where the active time lore thing does that, but in a much more straightforward, much more less rich way that is great if you just need something quick to reference to remember who that is or where that is. But it's not so great when you need to reference it to understand, okay, oh, that's why the Sanbukwa emperor or whatever did that, or some stuff like that. Like, I would have appreciated it more if it had done so I could get an idea of what I'm dealing with these two continents. So, you know, we can know about customs and traditions and shit like that versus, you know, the history of slavery in this world. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And because that richness is an enticement to continue to read, because there's so many little things that you can learn that unlocks something like, oh, okay, I understand that, versus Active Time Lore, which is like, this is a nice encyclopedia. There is no color here.
I think a great example of this is when you meet Uncle Byron, which the game also has a bad tendency of like saying things like revealing that characters had relatives literally right before you meet them, where it's like, I feel like Clive would have mentioned this uncle, should have mentioned this uncle, like before we meet him, but whatever. I love the moment where you meet him and they act out that play. But what I wish was that we knew what that play was before that scene. Even just the name, the Saint and the Secretary, you know? But you only ever get an entry about it in the wiki after that scene. And that, to me, feels like I just went to that scene a little confused and then needed the wiki for an explanation rather than getting excited about something because I read it in the wiki and I feel like now I finally get to see something that I've only read about.
I love that moment for the exact reason you describe. I thought of it as a different way. I thought this was a nice nod to Final Fantasy fans who have been with the series for a long time, because there are a lot of moments in other Final Fantasy games where they reference like in-world plays. I'm thinking I Want to Be Your Canary. I'm thinking of Loveless from Final Fantasy VII. And the minute that I saw like Clive like start to act out, I'm like, oh, they're doing this universe's equivalent of I Want to Be Your Canary. I'm 100% all in. I know what this is. I recognize this.
Yeah.
Yes. 100% perfect.
Yeah, I just wish that, you know, it's about setup and payoff, which I think is a major problem with the plot. I liked that was written in that way. I liked that it was a call back towards other Final Fantasy things. And I liked that was how Clive proved to his uncle that he was who he said he was by invoking their memories. I just wish I was a little bit more on the inside of that moment. You know, I wish that I could have perked up and said, oh, it's the Saint and the Secretary. I've just read about this, like I sometimes do when I'm playing Dragon Age.
On the other hand, I love Uncle Byron.
Uncle Byron is so good.
Best character. One of the best characters.
One of the only guys having a good time. Just like the game desperately needed.
Gav, I can't remember what his name is. Gav is also one of my favorite characters, and he came from an unlooked for place because he's also having a lot of fun and has a lot of heart behind him. Yes. And it ended up being way more developed than I thought they would have done for him. So he's cool. He can stay. Same with Karen, the surly item seller. She's fun.
This has been bothering me, and I just want to say it real quick. There's like a big chunk of this game where they're like, we're gonna build a ship. And you spend like hours building a ship, and it's like, oh man, you're gonna get this ship. And then it just like...
It exists.
Yeah, it does not exist, like does not have any bearing on the plot. And it's just like, that moment is the whole game in a nutshell for me, where it gets me excited about something, and it's like, ooh, what's this gonna do? Like, am I gonna get like an airship? Like, is this gonna be like a thing I get to do mechanically? And then like, it's nothing. It's just something that's filling time. And to me, so much of the story is like, that beat over and over and over again, where I'm like, okay, maybe this one will pay off into something, and it's like, no, I mean, it's not.
It starts from the very beginning of the game with the slavery thing, which has been discussed ad nauseum. But the game sets up this system, this economic system, where every single nation in Valisthea, except for the one where they murder all the magic users, requires magical slaves to function. And it is... I don't even want to fucking get into it, honestly, but it's like, should be obvious to everyone that these kinds of fantasy stories have been told a ton of times, and if you're going to tell a story like this without the perspective of the enslaved people that you're describing, you're making a specific choice. And one choice that it used to be more popular pre-1960, and then after 1960 it became less popular for reasons I'm sure you can extrapolate. But the game sets all of this up and sets it up as a huge central conflict to the story. And then eventually there's just no payoff for it whatsoever. Eventually it ceases mattering because you've literally destabilized every single world government in Valisthea. So it kind of doesn't matter if anyone's enslaved or not.
Right. Here's my maybe blasphemous question. It seems like the best part of this game is the bombastic fight sequences that are right in your path that you encounter no matter what. If you just hammer through and speed run this game, skip the cutscenes, mash through the dialogue, just get to the next fight, is that the best way to enjoy this game?
Oh, no. And I'm going to tell you why. And it's because of Ralph Ineson and Ben Starr.
I was going to say the same shit. I'm so mad that the performances are so good. But especially in the beginning when it's Ralph Ineson and Ben Starr, like, quipping back and forth to each other, their scenes together are fun. And I do like them. And I think Ben Starr should get cast in fucking everything after this. He's amazing.
He's really good.
I think you play through the first 8 hours of the game and you let all the cutscenes roll and you have fun. And as soon as you get to the third act jump, I feel like there you can maybe start skipping around a little bit.
I like that.
Which is maybe 30 hours of game. But that first 8 hours, no, don't skip that stuff. That's where the good stuff is. That's where all the good stuff that doesn't come back or pay off is.
What you're telling me is the equivalent of oh man, this show is really good until you get to season 4, then absolutely stop watching after
it's
season 4.
exactly like that. They've recreated a television watching experience that used to be more common, right? Where a show goes on for 10 seasons and you're like, well, the first 3 are pretty fucking great, but the last 7 aren't good at all.
I really bought into Ben Starr's performance. I really bought into his relationship with his brother Joshua. I really felt that. He made me feel that. I really got into Sid and his whole freedom fighting quest or whatever. Those parts of the game I really appreciated, which is why I couldn't bring myself to skip cutscenes. I'll mash through some fucking text though when Sid has to talk to people because nothing of value is ever said there.
So true.
But there are parts of the story that are worth seeing them play out, and one of those moments is definitely the whole Clive and Joshua thing. And if we're talking about spoilers, I'm kind of upset because there is kind of like Jill, Joshua's a little underdeveloped because spoiler alert, Joshua's not dead. He comes back and then we don't know what happened to him in those 13 years that he was gone.
He never tells us.
We know that he was with some shadow cabal organization, but that's it. We get no insight into anything that happened to him whatsoever, except that he has a cool ride or die shield person that I wish they gave more screen time to.
Listen, I'm gonna be on AO3. I want to see what people come up with.
Yeah.
And I'll just one more thing. I don't mean to shade Yoshi P too much, but Naoki Yoshida, you did say the story would be complete on launch, and it doesn't feel that way. For reasons that Ash just said. It seems like they went for understated, but it really comes off as just unexplained. There's a lot more story here, and I feel cheated as a player for not having a chance to see what characters are up to when they're not literally right in front of my eyes.
Oh god, are we going to get a Final Fantasy 15 version where all the DLC is the intervening years where we figure out what Joshua was doing for all that time and what Clive was doing for that 5-year gap in the second act jump?
Yoshi P was kind of implying that he wouldn't do that by saying that statement, but it feels like there are many points in the game where they could release story DLC that explains what happened to the characters.
Yeah, and not to discredit Yoshi P, but also before the game came out, he did say it's a grounded fantasy, which didn't exactly end up being true because you do fight God and go to space, but
Yeah, man. So the Bahamut fight, you fucking go to space. You turn into a demon and you punch a dragon in the face. I wanted to run around my apartment. I was so fucking psyched.
Fucking hype, dude. That was
Oh my
so
God.
good. I was it was one of those I can't believe we're doing this. No, there's no way we're doing this. We're
Now
not doing
that
this.
sounds Devil May Cry.
Right? Yeah.
Absolutely. There's a boss fight against Titan where there's a Sonic the Hedgehog section where you're running down a half pipe.
Oh, I
dodging
love that
part. Rocks, and it's
and the music during the Titan fight is the best in the game.
Amazing.
It's so good.
And that's another thing. We have been talking so much shit about this game that would probably turn off your average casual player who's nah, I don't want to do this. This isn't for me. But then at the same time, we have to go, no, you should play this game. And it is because of Ben Starr, Ralph Ineson, the fights, and fucking Masayoshi Soken, because holy shit.
God.
Without that soundtrack, this game is nothing.
It's
Those
so true.
fights are not nearly as epic as we make them sound without that soundtrack.
When the choral arrangements start coming in, there's
shit's
oh
real.
my god!
Shit is happening.
Tim Rogers once told me that there were certain points in the first God of War game where he would just shout a Lotus apartment, yeah! And that's how I felt when I would hear the choral arrangements going off.
when Latin is getting spoken, you know
word.
you are about to get fucked up or
when
fuck
they bring
something up.
Latin in, you know shit's gonna be off the fucking chain.
So we are all pro Final Fantasy Latin here.
Yes.
Oh,
absolutely.
100%.
Yeah, I agree.
And you know what? We've been like trash talking a lot, or not trash talking, criticizing. I think healthily parts of this game, but I think we all agree on some level that like the blockbuster parts of it, the like turn your brain off, like fun video game entertaining escapist parts of it are really good, you know. And I get why people are loving it because of that. Because if you're someone who's just a pure gameplay person, yeah, there's so much good spectacle here, and the action is so rewarding, and those boss fights are incredible, and the music and the aesthetic and everything. It depends on how much you get invested in all the other stuff it throws at you, which is a lot of other stuff, to be fair. I've been saying it reminds me, this is the worst comparison that I'm ever going to make in my life, and I'm so sorry. It reminds me of the first time I saw the only time I saw the film Mortal Engines. Anybody remember Mortal
Oh my
Engines?
god,
remember that,
Mortal
yeah.
Engines, that's a wild movie.
It's not good, and this game is obviously better, but like
Oh, the
Mortal
one with the
Engines-
moving cities. I
Yes.
remember this.
It's about moving cities, and like a friend dragged me to it because like he was hyped about it, and I remember like the story is nonsense, and I don't remember any characters. I don't remember anything that happens in it. But damn, anytime the city of London came up on screen as a mech and was like fighting like Germany, I was like, yeah, and that's
Yeah.
like this game for me is my Mortal Engines, where I'm like those moments that got me hyped up. They did it. They got me hyped up.
That's cinema, baby. You know,
That's cinema.
I was going to compare it in my review, and I ended up not having enough room in it to make this metaphor work. But it's like Michael Bay. Michael Bay is not interested in human beings. He is interested in creating a level of spectacle that I do not think any other filmmaker can achieve. Transformers movies are all garbage. That's true. But if you look at the fight scenes in isolation, I don't know if any other person could direct those in the world.
Totally. And
Just can't.
The icon battles, this is the thing that like drives me nuts. The icon battles have storytelling to them. Like those
Yes.
30-minute fights, there is a story and there are power dynamics that are communicated through gameplay and through like their incredible animations. And like I wish they just had the confidence to be like, let's just tell the story through these, and you'll get those parts through it. But instead, you know, we get these incredible moments that feel groundbreaking and feel like genuinely like what a video game kind of should do, you know, in terms of how the special ways they can tell stories. And then that's saddled down with like, here's your 10th subquest where you talk to 3 people and then go back and get more lore. And that's just where it's like, guys, you got something here. You got something here. Just have confidence.
Yeah. I felt like by the end of the game, if they just let this be an action game and just let go of all the RPG stuff, it would have been better.
Yeah.
I agree.
I want to ask one more question. Should Final Fantasy games be attempting to portray mature themes at all?
They've done it before, though. You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And they did it well. I mean,
Like several times.
10 is beneath its sort of CW-esque, you know, presentation of the story, which I enjoy because I genuinely enjoy CW shows. It has a very meaningful story about orthodoxy and religion and actually tries to examine it from all angles. And 12 is similarly. I think some of the stuff near the end falls apart, but they actually portray a political conflict with a great amount of nuance. Even when they get silly with it, I feel like they do a better job of trying to actually nail its themes. It just feels like this one was so focused on being mature in a very specific way. Being mature meaning HBO, you know, prestige television show, which worked very well for Naughty Dog, I will say, but does not necessarily work for this genre.
Yeah, I mean, Final Fantasy has just always been playful, and it has always been serious, and it's balanced that seriousness with its silliness, and I think that's what made it special. There are very few Final Fantasy games, if any, where I'm like, I think of that game and I'm like, oh, that game's like this game, you know, or like this other thing. And this, to me, is the first Final Fantasy game where I'm like, oh, this is like Devil May Cry, or this is like, you know, this is like Game of Thrones. I just think that it tries too hard to look at other things and mimic what other things are doing instead of really looking at what Final Fantasy does well, which is that weird balance between being playful and silly and still mature. And you see that in like Final Fantasy VII and the remake especially, where it's so goofy. You fight a house. You fight Hell House in the game, but you also get these like really deep and well thought out themes and like meditations about destiny and free will and what it means to break away from those things and like eco-terrorism, and it's balanced in really well. And I think the mistake they do here is just thinking that they can't still do the fun stuff, like that you can't have a walking cactus and do that stuff. And it's like, no, you can. You've always done it. And I think that's what is like missing for me tonally. Like they could totally have told this story, but they don't seem to be having fun doing it.
Yeah.
Well, it's what a child would think a mature story is like, because there's a lot of, fucks and cocks and sex position without actual sex that, move forward nothing, but it's just like, oh, the specter of titties, and that's great.
Ghost titties. It is like that, though. There's like sex worker characters in the game, and they don't even talk about, like, the sex workers don't talk about having sex. The characters don't refer to the sex workers, even in problematic terms, right? Like, there's no acknowledgement of what their actual profession is, but they keep talking about brothels, ooh, or misses, but it feels like a 1970s body English sex comedy more than an actual mature discussion of sex, sexuality, the role of sex in human life. It makes me think about 6 a lot. 6 is a game that has, I think, the most mature expression of loss in the entire series, where you lose, and then you have to live with your loss in the world after. But guess who's the villain of Final Fantasy VI? A freaking clown who thinks
it's the Joker. They just put the Joker in that game.
Like, Final Fantasy is a game series that at its best says, we will make you cry while you're fighting an evil clown. And this game did not have the evil clown element that I needed.
Yeah.
That's absolutely it. Yes, Final Fantasy has been doing mature themes for decades. It's just, you need to temper it.
Mm-hmm. You need Blitzball, it turns out.
Any last thoughts about this nightmare story before we move on?
I'm really upset that the game kind of plays with your emotions with regards to Dion.
Yeah.
Dion is like the Bahamut icon before Clive takes his powers, and he might be like the first explicit in-game confirmed gay character. Like, I know that the developers have said things about Fang and Vanille after the fact, but Dion is confirmed by the game in his actions and in the lore as a homosexual. And so when you fight him after the first time, you're like, oh, he's dead. Okay, so we did the kill your gays thing. But oh, wait, he's not dead. He goes away. And then you think like, oh, God, every time you see him, you get scared that you're thinking, oh, God, they're going to kill him. They're going to kill him. We're going to bury your gays. And then every time he like comes out of a scrape, you're like, oh, thank God. Until they finally actually do it. Yes! I'm like, son of a bitch.
It really was like that for me, too. I was like, oh, my God, they're actually doing it. He's actually gay. Oh, my God, I'm going to kill him and then he's going to die. Oh, he's alive. Oh, he's alive. Oh, he's going to die. Oh, he's going to die.
We're not
he's
doing
alive.
This. They're finally doing something different. Yeah. And then they're like, finally, like, no, we're not going to be different with this. He's dead.
Don't play chicken with gay people with me, okay? Let them live. It reminded me so much of Game of Thrones, the House of the Dragon. Spoilers if you haven't seen the specific episode, but I'll explain in broad strokes. There's a character who's gay, and other characters realize that he needs to go out of the picture. Rather than kill him, they have his lover kidnap him and take him across the sea so they can live out their lives in anonymity together. And every other character, including his parents, thinks he's dead. So you get to have the emotional weight of other characters believing this character is dead and the intensity of a death of a character, but simultaneously, this gay character gets to live freely. I wish that we had gotten that level of respect for Dion, and I just don't feel like the narrative respected him that much.
And they do a lot with him for that to play out the way that it does.
Yeah.
And it's really sad.
Yeah.
All right. Now I'd like to talk about this game.
No.
How do you guys do that? God. It seems terrible.
I try.
It's really
like you guys volunteered to do it again after everything that like let's catch people up on what it's like to talk about Final Fantasy in public.
Whew.
Who wants to go first?
A lot of people want me to die. That's good. Somebody wants me to be impaled. That's cool.
No.
That was that. Somebody gave like a really descriptive one. I mean, like, I'm sure I've gotten it the least bad of anyone here. But like, I definitely hit a point where, after my like 10th email of like, kill yourself, I almost just emailed back, like, come do it yourself, you coward. I
Nice.
really wanted to.
Respect that
I was on the
energy.
verge of giving someone my home address and being like, you come here and shoot me, motherfucker.
Make me a martyr to Final Fantasy.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, I don't know. I think this game is so weird because I think it is at the perfect cross section of like everything wrong in like a lot of gaming discourse right now, where one, it's this huge franchise that people are obsessed with. It's creators that people are obsessed with and are really defensive over. It also has this console wars thing behind it because it's a PlayStation exclusive. So then you get the like PlayStation fanboys who maybe don't care about Final Fantasy but want to stick it to Xbox. And then you also get the other side of it, which is, the weird contingent of like, oh, people are complaining because the game's not woke, and like bandwagoning on because of that. So you have these like three things butting up, and I think it has just made the most combustible video game humanly possible, like engineered in a lab to hurt anyone who talks about it.
I mean, the second you try to talk about race in a group of nerd-inclined people, you will get guns pointed at your head, essentially. And this is a game that, in order to have a narrative about slavery, decided to not have anyone browner than a paper bag in it,
Right.
It's kind of impossible for me and for Ash to not talk about race. I'm sitting there playing the game blackly while they're all talking about how they didn't realize separating children from their mothers and turning them into slaves was bad.
Yeah.
I don't know how I'm supposed to react to that. There's only one way I can react based on who I am in the world. It was wild to me going back and forth between that game and this book that I've read that's incredible, Chain Gang All-Stars. I highly recommend it. It takes inspiration, wildly enough, from video games and from anime, but it is about 20 minutes in the future, for-profit prison systems have used their inmates to start a new kind of death sport where certain inmates sign up for a commuted sentence of going on chain gang marches across the United States where they meet up in these battlegrounds and fight each other to death. And it's a much more extreme look at the issue of slavery, but it is, I think, way more impactful and way, way more thoughtful. I can only imagine trying to discuss slavery in the terms that that book does with the kinds of people that play Final Fantasy XIV. It feels like when you talk to video game fans, they want their products to be treated like art, but they only ever want the reviews to serve as personal justifications, affirmations for what they buy. And I'm sorry, you can enjoy Final Fantasy, and I largely enjoyed this game, but that doesn't mean that I don't have a right to say, I think it's weak in these specific areas and strong in others.
Yeah, there was a weird, like, I was kind of following some pre-launch threads like on some message boards just to see how bad I should prepare for the backlash when I knew what, how we were reviewing it. And it was weird, like there was just this whole contingent of people who were like, this game needs to get a 90 on Metacritic. It would mean so much to us for this game to get a 90 on Metacritic because like a Final Fantasy hasn't done it for a while. And I'm like, this game isn't your dad. Like, what are you talking about? Why do you care if this game gets a 90 on Metacritic? And yeah, it just feels like people have tied their personality to a brand here in a way that, again, I think it's not just a gaming thing. It happens, in lots of stuff. It's the same thing as like Marvel versus DC or WWE versus AEW or like anything where people are just like ascribing a sense of self-worth to this game and to like these series that they love. And I don't know, it's just like we still can criticize things we love. There are plenty of games that I love that I have so many problems with. Stranger Paradise, great example. I really like that game. It's a really wild and weird game. Also,
it's very
something
silly,
that, like,
though.
yeah, it's really silly and has a lot of problems, and it's kind of sloppy in a lot of areas. And like, I have no problem talking about that. But I was seeing people who were even reviewing this game really well and giving it like 8.5s or 9s or whatever in their scores, and people were still like mad at them for even saying anything. And it's just like, do you actually care about the thing, or do you just care about the name at that point? Like, if you're not willing to actually criticize the thing and want it to be better and want to be constructive and push these creators to, make a better thing, like, do you actually care about it anymore? And I just, it makes me wonder if people actually care about Final Fantasy, or if they just care about like sticking it to somebody in this way that doesn't really mean anything.
It's sports teams.
Yes. Yes.
They're
Yeah.
rooting for the logo.
There's also a weird contingent of people who believe that because this game was developed by Japanese people, that
Yes.
because of that, they're not capable of perpetuating racist stereotypes, which is really funny considering we're talking about Japan. Don't
Yeah.
wiki that.
Ooh.
Listen, there is a Black Lives Matter movement in Tokyo, and it exists there for a reason.
Yeah.
You know, like
Yeah.
Jaffe and I personally know someone that was subject to, I think, of racial animosity in Japan and can now no longer live there.
Absolutely.
So it is very frustrating, I'll say, to see that argument come up again and again. I know,
Yeah.
Ash, you experienced it when you wrote about, more specifically about the ways a lack of diversity among the characters of the game really limits the scope and scale of its narrative, especially the kind of narrative it's trying to
That evokes
say
slavery. Yeah.
about slavery, and I completely agree with you. I think it's a great article.
How much is this a wider problem with all video games and, in fact, all fantasy?
So Final Fantasy 16 does that weird thing that fantasy games can't stop doing, where they try to map real world injustices on fake things, and it doesn't work, because in this specific instance, it's people who have magical powers. They're bears, they are slaves, they are branded on the face, so you can differentiate, people who can use magic versus normal people who can't. And it all very much ties to like Jim Crow or Jewish persecution and stuff like that. And they do the same thing in Dragon Age. And
They sure do.
It doesn't work, because if I am a person who is being discriminated against because I have magic, I'm just going to light you on fire.
Listen, I was like, where are the slave revolts? There would be
Yeah.
slave revolts, wouldn't they? But then you meet the enslaved people and they're like, don't help us. We want to be enslaved. And it's weird.
Yeah.
I have the same problem with X-Men, but that might be a different discussion.
These allegories don't work, because there
Yeah.
is nothing inherently dangerous about me as a Black person or somebody else as a Jewish person.
Mhm.
But there is something, whether you like it or not, inherently dangerous by someone who can light you on fire with your mind. That doesn't mean they should be treated with getting, the equivalent of a Star of David stamped on their face. But at the same time, we should maybe, the governments and people at large should probably come up with some kind of way to ensure that everybody can live safe and free. That, it requires
Yeah.
more thought or whatever.
It's like if some people were born with guns for hands.
Yeah,
You know, those people should be able to live free, but we should also teach them about how you don't want to use your gun hands on everybody you see.
What would the
Exactly.
slur be for gun-handed people?
Trigger fingers, baby.
Oh,
There,
God, that's
got
so
it in
good.
one. My
Yeah.
God.
That's
It reminded
good.
me, this game reminded me a lot of Lee Bardugo's The Grishaverse books, which are also on Netflix as Shadow and Bone. So in that narrative, there are people who have native magical ability and they are removed from their families at a young age, but they're taken to a palatial estate and become wards of the state. And they actually have their own political leader and their own mythologies and their own cultural traditions. They are welcomed not into a system of slavery, but into a new separate kind of family that is separate and lesser than, but also knows their own power. And that leads to really interesting dynamics between magical people and non-magical people, and a more understandable level of discrimination, and one that feels reasonable. But that's also, like, the thing with the slavery here, it's like, they went out of their way to invent, like, a new version of chattel slavery, essentially. Like, it's remarkably similar to chattel slavery, when there's so many different other kinds of ways people have been enslaved or servants of the state that they could have drawn inspiration from. I just don't know why it had to be this in this way, and why we never get any perspectives of people who are enslaved.
And then they do nothing with them.
Yeah.
And nothing. It just drops. I went back and after I beat it, I went and I reread the Yoshi P interview that kind of kickstarted the whole red flags for this thing, where the gives the quote about like, oh, it's like it's like based in Europe, and like it's an isolated nation. And one of the things that stood out after playing the game is there was like a line in there where he said something like, when you're dealing with certain plot points, like, you get into a weird thing where no matter what side of the plot point those people are on, it's going to be received in a way. And reading it back now, I think what his implication might have been was like, there's slavery in the game, and we don't want to do the cliche of black people being slaves, but also we don't want to have them be the slavers. And it's like, man, if you can't figure out a nuanced way to do this, then don't write about it. Like, just
Right.
don't have a story about this if you can't figure out how to do it. Like, you're not.
And it's like, the broader world of entertainment has lapped them on this issue. It's kind of embarrassing. After reading Chain Gang All-Stars, which goes to great lengths to include the perspective of the fictional people who are enslaved and also real examples from American history of how the prison system is used for slave labor, it feels embarrassing to watch a series of writers just try to go so wide around the issue without addressing the inherent political problems of it. You could have just gone straight in. Chain Gang All-Stars rules. It is so thrilling and entertaining, and it also makes you really feel a deep empathy for the enslaved in a way that this game doesn't. Like, yes, the game says slavery is wrong, and I'm sure that is like a basic bare minimum, and I'm sure a few people playing the game will have never considered that viewpoint before, which is tragic. But it doesn't make you feel like the enslaved are real people.
Because they're not.
They're not. They're
Right.
props that, for the most part, end up lynched. And, like, I don't know how they thought it wasn't going to trigger intense emotional reactions from black players to see slaves get lynched from trees.
No matter if they're white or not.
Yeah, man, it's just charged imagery. I was left at the end of the game really wondering why the slavery aspect was there at all. It just doesn't seem to matter, and they aren't interested in the topic, and they go to great lengths. Clive eventually becomes an enslaved soldier, but he never identifies with the enslaved. He gets his tattoo removed, so he is no longer visually identified as an enslaved, and he doesn't make strong enough connections to fellow bearers to feel like he is one and a part of them. He's only ever reinforcing like that he has special blood and he's the only specialist boy that can defeat Ultima, which is just another way of justifying the divine right of kings, which is kind of weird.
If I can attempt to explain it, I really, really think they didn't think about it. There are slaves in this game because there are slaves in Game of Thrones.
So depressing.
Where are the slaves? The Iron Island?
The Unsullied.
Oh, the Unsullied. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, my man Grey Worm.
Did not know that he was also Lestat in Interview with the Vampire,
Yeah,
and my mind exploded.
Ooh.
He's Louis de Pontelac, and he's
Louis,
perfect.
sorry.
He's perfect Louis. It's perfect. If you haven't seen it, you have to watch it. It's so good. Anyway, I could talk about that forever.
Yeah, it feels like they took a book of like fantasy tropes and they just started pulling them out, and they were like, this one's in the game. Oh, slavery? Oh yeah, that's in the game too.
Slavery is in this game as if there was never slavery in the real world.
Right.
Yeah,
it's just
that's
a
what it
fictional
feels
thing.
like.
Yeah.
When literally that scene where Clive is like, well, they just, tested everybody at birth and the children were taken to become bearers and I just thought it was for the best. It's like, you literally never thought about that? None of you
Right.
ever thought about removing a child from their mother and like the trauma that occurs when you do that? Okay.
And honestly, I kind of almost wish that, when we're talking about like, why doesn't this game seem like it has diversity of peoples in it? Game developers were more willing to just be straight up. And it definitely feels like now that we have seen the game, like they were like, yeah, we probably don't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole. Not that they would have to have made bearers black. I mean, you could still include black people in this world.
Yeah.
That, that in which slavery also exists, just, make sure not everybody's all black or one color on one side or the other. You could have done that.
Yeah.
And if they had just said, we have these themes in this game that touch on themes that are present in the real world that we thought might have made people uncomfortable if we had included black people or more diverse people in the game. Tell me straight up why. Don't make excuses about, historical accuracy, which is a fallacy in and of itself. Don't tell me to like wait and see. Just tell me. and I would
Yeah.
respect you a lot more, and I would be very much more prepared. And I would respect you for the fact that you were honest with me up front, and I didn't have to discern after the fact, like, oh, you guys are doing some fuck shit with this story, and you didn't want to touch the fact that there be good Black people are in this with like a 10-foot pole. I respected that. And at the same time, the diversity that they do include, which we can quibble about, because like there's one area in the game that is supposed to be like this Arabic stand-in, and the reason why you know it's an Arabic stand-in because there's sand everywhere and a sitar plays the minute you get there.
Oh my God,
So
yes.
it's like even the diversity that they do include is this very one-note hackneyed, like we're gonna use all the shorthands that we can, and then everybody speaks in like a fucking Cockney accent.
Yeah.
And nobody's darker than a paper bag.
I was
So it's
gonna
like-
say in my review, and then Gio, you'll understand this. I grew up in a very Italian hometown. And it's like there are people who are brown skinned, and you know they could be Sicilians. They could be Sicilians, and they could be Middle Eastern, or they could be Sicilians. There's really no way to tell.
Like the diversity that the game does try to persuade or portray is like extremely one note flat, you know, a child's idea of what diversity is. Like, sure, fine. I don't even know if you can make the claim if this game just features nothing but white people, because that would do a disservice to like Middle Eastern people that are very clearly trying to be included in this game. But at the same time, like, those people too feature like a spectrum of like colors and cultures and things that get flattened out into sand placed with the sitar. So it's like,
yeah, man,
dude, what are you doing?
Yeah,
it's a mishmash of both Arabic and Indian architecture in there, Arabic and Indian clothing styles. It takes a lot of the things that George R.R. Martin was commenting on. Like, he has this whole world that is, you know, representative of things that, you know, like Dune does, like where it's like, this is Arabia, you know, which is an orientalized version of real world cultures. But in George R.R. Martin's work, he takes those ideas and then problematizes them. He brings out the contradictions of them, and he also tries to tie them closer to real world history so you understand more specifically what it's based on, rather than being like a European person's idea of what quote unquote Arabia would be. Here it's just sort of like they saw the show and was like, and then we have an Arabic area.
Yeah.
You know?
I do want to say this isn't new to Final Fantasy XVI. Almost every Final Fantasy has done something like this to an extent. Like, oh, this is this ethnic city. This is that ethnic city. But it's been kind of flattened out as a cartoon.
Yeah.
And the fact that Final Fantasy XVI looks so like a big budget project is really what draws out those flat stereotypes and puts it out on display. But this is something that has always been there.
It's very true.
Is there anything else we'd like to say about people perceiving our writing about this game online and in public spaces?
God, just look, if you love video games and you want them to be good, please just be open to people even giving the mildest critique about the games. Like, it does nobody any favors when you just pretend that you love everything in a game and you know will back it no matter what. Like, you know, criticisms get back to developers a lot of times. Like, reviews we write, I've been told by PR people, like, yeah, we collect those and we bring them back. It is a really direct way that you can kind of get feedback back to developers, and, you know,
criticism is how games get better.
Yeah, it's how games get better. And like, people see critics as such an adversarial thing where it's like, oh, they're just trying to like destroy these developers, whatever. And it's so silly. It's like, I don't know. I can only speak for myself. I do criticism because I love it, because I love games and I really believe that they can be better and do better. And anytime I'm writing a criticism, it's coming from a place of love. Like, I want to see Final Fantasy 17 really push on the stuff that's amazing here. I want to see like the next one be the best version of the action that's in this, and you know, like the places where they're really strong. But there's definitely stuff that's not great in it. And even the really glowing reviews, even like some of the 10 out of 10 reviews are like, it's not perfect and here are problems with it. And the less we call that stuff out, the more you get into the kind of like every game is the same, you know, where it's like, we don't need to get better because everyone has accepted that they will just eat this level of game up. And it's just, if you actually like games, yeah, it's okay to criticize them. It's not a personal attack on you.
Right.
Or like, literally, if you don't want to hear about the criticisms, you can just scroll We're not hurting you. It's not like we came to your house.
The thing is,
with a
they
gun or
don't
anything.
want to hear about the criticism. They want the points. They see critics as the points givers.
Yeah. I mean, it is not the reason why I write about video games, right?
Not
to
at all.
give brands points or take points away from brands. I want to do what everyone always says that they want from culture, which is to treat games like other forms of art. I come from a cinema background, and one of my favorite critics ever is Pauline Kael, and I try to approach everything in the way that she does, which is with curiosity and empathy, but also a strong critical eye to acknowledge when pulp does things that are really exciting and fun and new, and when larger, more established brands do things that are rote or mechanical. And I do that because I really like them well. Like Gio, I love games. I wish I liked games less. 'Cause it hurt me.
That would make this much easier.
That's something I keep hearing on this show from people.
It's like I'm happy though to like exist in a world where I just come out of my cave every 4 to 6 months with a review and then return into it, and people can scream outside of my cave and I'll never hear about it. But what I can't really abide is like when it becomes a campaign, or it becomes like a weird like smear campaign or harassment campaign to say this person hates games and is stupid, and I'm going to go to their website and send them an email to tell them to kill themselves. You know, I don't understand that point of view, and it makes me feel like these people don't actually like art and don't mean it when they say they want games to be art.
Yeah, it's a lot about the gotcha, because one of the funniest things that happened to me during this is like, you know, I'm criticizing Final Fantasy XVI for the way that it treats diversity. And, you know, people flatten that out to like, oh, you just want more Black people or whatever. Like, where were you for Forspoken? And I'm like, oh, really? You wanted to know where I was for Forspoken? Because I was banging that drum more than anybody else in this space, because I fucking love that game. So, like, yes, consistency is there. And if you cared at all about anything that I do as a writer, or cared anything at all about what critics do in this space, and we're actually like following what critics are saying about all these different games, you would have known that and not stepped on that obvious landmine. So it really signals to me like these people don't care about anything that I have to say, or not listening to anything that I have to say critically. They just want the points. They want the gotcha. They want the, oh, I just exposed you for being a hypocrite, when it's like, no, I've been saying the same thing about all of these games for a very long time. It is like a thing that is my thing. That's what I do. So it's really funny that you would think that like, oh, I'm only doing this to tear down a game. And especially when you bring up another game that I had been nothing but glowing about, because I love that game
We're
so
the number
much.
one cheerleader for Forspoken, and I'm going to find that code and I'm going to redeem it now, because I liked what Square was doing here, and I want to see it in a context that's like a little bit less tedious, you know?
They're not that dissimilar of games, to be totally honest. There's a lot of similarities.
I'm very excited. I'm really excited to pick. I'm happy to have an RPG to play. I always am, you know? I fucking love Final Fantasy so much. I like 16 enough that I started it on New Game Plus with the Final Fantasy difficulty, which is very fun and very challenging. And I'm probably going to go and skip all the cutscenes just to get to the boss fight. And play it again.
The right way to do it after hour 8.
Absolutely. And it's just like, as regressive as the culture of movies, music, and literature are, the culture of video games are so much more regressive. And I feel like the response that people have to us criticizing games fairly, and all of us liked this game, so I don't know why we're trying to pretend we didn't like it. But the reaction that people had to us giving measured criticism, the only place I see that in the world of movies anymore is in MCU and DCEU, like stuff, you know? And the rest of the culture of film has acknowledged and respects the role that critics have within the system. But in video games, things are still so corporate, as encouraged by development studios, PR departments, that it does become impossible to have any kind of critical conversation about games, even in realms that are not quite as politically charged. And it is worse for games overall, and more than that, it's really, really bad for developers, like the individual workers that are making the games you like. Mm-hmm. Like, if people aren't turning on us for criticizing games, they are turning on the developers directly for not doing exactly what they want. And that attitude that the consumer gets to dictate content, that comes from PR departments and marketing departments that say power to the player.
Yeah, you mentioned like this discourse coming up like in the film world and Marvel more so than anything, or like big blockbusters, and I think it does underscore that like a lot of these really big games that we talk about, like Final Fantasy 16, they are kind of our industry's equivalent to those blockbusters more than I think we treat them. Again, it's like these are the Game Awards games, like that's our Oscars, right? These are the best
Yeah.
games. When in fact, I think a lot of these games are kind of like the MTV People's Choice Award, nominees that you would
Yeah.
get, and that's fine. Like I love these blockbusters, but I think maybe that's part of it, where a lot of the games that you really would get meaningful discussion about and conversation about, like what Dordogne came out recently on Game Pass. It's like a really beautiful, little 4-hour narrative game. I just feel like maybe there's not room for nuance because these games are ultimately operating at that same blockbuster level that folks who are maybe mostly consuming that kind of movie or I don't know. That's the thing that I would posit is that like these games are more blockbusters than maybe we treat them as sometimes.
No, I think you're onto something there. I do think these games, AAA games especially, rely on spectacle to please their players, and I think that has had diminishing returns in terms of the entire industry and the way these games push the entire industry forward. I do understand the economic tentpole that these games hold, but I also feel like they take up so much oxygen that you don't get to talk about small experimental things that do actually inspire other developers.
Yeah.
Well,
absolutely.
we do appreciate the kinds of things that you have to say about video games here. And I'd like you to briefly plug where people can find your writing elsewhere online, for those of our listeners who mostly know you through podcasting.
Well, my Twitter account is currently locked, and it may never come unlocked, but I'm XOXO Gossip Gita everywhere, and I have a Substack where I will round up whatever I'm writing once a month and write a little essay just as a bonus. And if you find me on those social media accounts, just be nice to me. Thank you. Bye.
Our listeners will. We're good people here.
I'm Ash. You can find me pretty much everywhere at Adashtra, ADASHTRA. I currently write about video games for The Verge, so you can catch all of my stuff there. And I will occasionally write about things on my Twitter account that is not locked, but probably should be.
The Verge, great content, bad logo.
And I'm Giovanni. I'm at Mario Prime on Twitter, and you can find my writing about video games currently on digitaltrends.com.
All right. Before we close, I had a list of like 20 questions here from our listeners that we did a really good job of addressing throughout the content of this conversation. But there is one more left. So I'm going to turn this over to our lightning returns round as submitted by a community member, Connor. We need to rank the top 10 hottest Final Fantasy boys right now.
Oh my God.
Easy. We can do that. That's all. No, that's not hard at all.
All
Your
right.
confidence. I'm so impressed by you. I mean, Clive is now on the list, right?
Clive,
Yes.
it does make the list. Okay, we'll start with Clive.
No, okay, so define your terms. Do you mean main characters or do you mean overall? Because if you mean overall, we're going to be here forever. If you mean main characters, we can do this in 2 minutes.
Okay, let's stick to main characters because we don't have a lot of time.
Okay, unranked top 10 will definitely include Clive now.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm down with that.
Definitely includes Cloud, because he's just the OG. You
Cloud
know.
hotter or less hot than Clive?
Less hot.
Okay,
Yeah.
that makes
Sure,
sense.
sure. I'll go with
All
that.
right.
Okay,
We're
main
only talking like
characters.
main characters, like main playable characters. We're not getting into like a Sephiroth or a Cid in this game.
We're talking
Yeah.
about main dudes.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I think beneath Cloud, for me, is Noctis.
Correct.
Yes, I love that.
Is there anyone hotter than Cloud? Or hotter than Clive?
There must be, right?
I'm
Yeah.
going to vouch for the rogue from Final Fantasy 1. He's got a charm to him.
Okay, I got you. Who's
Yeah.
hotter than Clive? Lightning.
Oh my God.
You did
Clive.
say boys, though.
I did say boys.
Hey, boys.
Lightning's in a category of her own.
How do we feel about Titus from Final Fantasy
I
X?
do love him.
We
He's
don't
such
feel
an
anything
idiot.
about him.
He's an idiot. I love him so
Good.
much, though. If you're into himbos, then I suppose he could be on the list.
Below
But he's
Noctis.
not a hotter himbo than Zidane is.
That's true. Titus,
Okay, so
I think-
Zidane, then Titus.
yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
What about Squall?
I was about to say, Squall's got to be up there, right?
I honestly think Squall.
He's not the hottest one even in his game. It's Irvine.
That's very fair.
But I do think Squall could fit in between Cloud and Noctis, though.
Yeah.
I think he's hotter than Noctis.
Sure.
But do we think Zidane is hotter than Squall?
Okay, what version of Noctis? Because adult Noctis will definitely be Squall.
Oh, damn,
but,
that's true.
Squall will be normal Noctis.
I was thinking pouty, sad, normal Noctis.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Let's just throw out really quick our good boy from Final Fantasy, Stranger of Paradise, Alex.
I'll allow
his
it.
name? Alex Garland.
Yeah.
Angry man.
Is he in? Is
That's
he not?
Jack, right?
Jack.
Yes,
Jack
Garland.
Jack, thank you. Is he in? Is he not in?
I think he's in.
If he's in, he's at the bottom of the list.
Yeah,
Totally.
it's true.
I agree.
Below Titus. All right.
Yeah, absolutely. Who else we got? Jeez.
Who else we got? I'm going to throw out my rogue and swap him out for the rogue with a personality, Locke from Final Fantasy VI.
I was gonna say, like, who is the main
Sure.
character in Final Fantasy VI? Is it Locke? Is
The
it
main
Terra?
boy
Terra,
is
I
Locke.
think.
No,
Okay.
you're right. Yeah, Locke is really cute.
You can make an argument for Terra, you can make an argument for Celise, but the main boy is Locke.
Locke, okay, and Locke on this list, I would put above Zidane, below Noctis, though, for me.
That makes sense. I like
Yeah.
that.
I'm going to make the argument that Balthier is the main character of Final Fantasy XII, just so we don't have to include Vaughn, because I don't think he belongs on the
I
list.
will allow Balthier.
Thank you. Well, if you're going to allow Balthier, then we're going to have to put him up higher, because he's definitely higher than Noctis and
Dude, yeah, he is.
Squall.
Yeah, he's right below Cloud.
You know what? Yeah.
He might be above Cloud, because I don't like Cloud's personality, but Balthier could get it at any time.
Wow. Are we all okay with that? I'm okay with
Sure.
I'll
it.
take
yeah,
it.
Why not? Yeah.
Absolutely, hell
Are
yeah.
we saying that Clive is the hottest Final Fantasy boy to date?
It feels wrong, but maybe.
His voice really does for me. Like
It doesn't feel wrong at all, because exactly like Gita, like his voice is there, he's got the personality, and he's got the looks.
And he's also like, as the Kendall Roy obsessee among us, he's got the like sad dog look that really does it for me.
I
Like-
was going to say that when you were imitating his voice early in the show, you were absolutely doing your Jeremy Strong voice.
I couldn't help it. I love people that look like they need to be wrapped up in a blanket with a mug of tea, and that's exactly what he looks like.
Yeah.
I think I'm good with Clive, though I will say I think Torgal probably actually number one.
All right.
best boy. For
Well,
We
he's the
need
goodies
one more
boy.
boy on this list, and I will argue that Vincent Valentine is the main character of Final Fantasy VII Dirge of Cerberus.
That's correct. You are absolutely correct. Put
Sure,
him on the
yeah.
list. He works.
Yeah.
All right,
no,
where
you're
does he
right.
go?
I had such a big crush on him as a
Yeah.
angsty Hot Topic shopping teen.
I'd put him above Cloud.
Well, then by that token, we're gonna have to include Zach.
We would have to include Zach.
No, I guess we would have to include Zach.
No,
Fuck,
but I
Crisis
think-
Core.
Oh my god. This is
This is
so
why I
stressful.
like not having Brandon, Tim, and Frank on the show. I can say fuck.
No, I think, okay, it's the top 10, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I think we can put Vincent Valentine on there
Yep.
and then accept this list as it is.
All right, Vincent above Cloud, below Balthier.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
All right,
That-
that is our list. We've got it. We got a lot done today, folks. Congratulations. We
Thank
should be
you.
proud of ourselves. This is the last we ever have to talk about Final
Oh,
Fantasy
thank
16.
God.
Thank God.
If anyone
Absolutely.
wants to talk about it, you can just refer them to this podcast. Gio, it was a pleasure. We will definitely have you on in the future for like a regular style episode.
Absolutely. I'd be thrilled to. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and this won't be the last you hear of Ash or Gita either. Here is my sign off. If you enjoyed this episode of Insert Credit or any episode, please rate and review our show wherever and however you can. You could also support us on patreon.com/insertcredit, where you could become a patron to submit your own questions, listen to monthly bonus episodes, and get more exclusive content. If you'd like to sponsor our show with an advertisement or personal message, it's easy and affordable to do that. Just contact us at show@insertcredit.com. You could also join our community at forums.insertcredit.com or find videos of these episodes on youtube.com/insertcreditshow. Please wishlist Demon School on Steam by Brandon Sheffield's own Necrosoft Games. Listen to our sister show, The Video Game History Hour, with Frank Cifaldi and Kelsey Lewin. This episode is edited by Esper Quinn, with original music by Kurt Feldman. You can find his music at kurtfeldman.bandcamp.com. I'm Alex Jaffe.
I'm Ash Parrish.
I'm Gita Jackson.
And I'm Giovanni Colantonio.
And when you play Final Fantasy XVI, you win or you die. That's the show. Congratulations, everybody. We did it.
That was a good pod.
That was
Good
awesome.
pod.
Good ass pod.